You couldn't come up with
I
anyone
know.
better than Trump and Musk. What do you think the attraction is of these two very odd men?
He's this loudmouth, I don't give a shit character that says, we're going to bring down the status quo.
I actually don't even think a civil war needs to look like a kind of armies on the battlefield. A civil war can be low-level insurgency. It can be domestic terrorism. It could be political assassinations.
It would be so easy to take a fraction of your fortune and be the coolest person on the planet.
When I heard that, I wanted to shoot myself in the head. You can't be the change candidate running as the person instead of Biden and go, yeah, but I would have done everything the same as Joe Biden.
The corporate interests that generally own the mainstream media, which is what attracted me to you in the first place, is that you do your best to get the truth out of this interview or out of this story. It's so sad that you should be anomalous. You know, that you can count the politicians in Congress who aren't taking corporate money on two fingers. Like,
I'm Mehdi Hassan.
I'm Nick Offerman.
And we're not kidding, a podcast from Zateo where funny people talk about serious things, but also, I hope, some funny things. Nick, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining us on We're Not Kidding.
That's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I half thought you might appear from a woodshed with some mutton chops, but you're looking very clean-shaven in what looks like a very normal part of your house.
That's right. Yeah, you never know where you're going to catch me, but at the moment, Megan, my wife, has had me sanitized and scrubbed for our biannual lovemaking session.
Just before the election, which we're going to talk about. The last time we spoke, Nick, that's how you mark elections. The last time we spoke was in May. I went back and checked. It was in May 2021. When I was at MSNBC, you were hosting the reality competition show Making It. And we were talking about COVID-19 vaccines. We were talking about, obviously, the fallout from the Trump era. You're still a big star. We still see you on the big screen. We're going to talk about that today. But, not much has happened politically since then. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really seen the news.
The news is that we are, 4 days out from what many are calling the most consequential election of our lifetimes. How are you feeling, Nick? Because I'll tell you what, I need this to be over.
You know what? I saw a great phrase out of Wisconsin. Somebody on the Democratic side said, "We're nauseously optimistic." And I thought that was very accurate. I will always be an optimist. I'll always put my faith in human beings, even when, a percentage of them are receiving so much disinformation and misinformation. Ultimately, as we proved in the last election, there are enough people with common sense getting the good information to put us over the top, but I'm definitely not feeling easy in the stomach area.
So let's break down the nausea and the optimism. When you say optimism, you actually think that she's the favorite right now? You think Harris can win?
I do. I can't help it. There's just it literally is surreal to imagine anything else because I don't adhere to Fox News, and so unless I have somebody telling me that black is white, then there seems no option but that Kamala will win handily.
And on the nausea point of it, and I talk about kind of election anxiety, where do you think that's coming from? It's funny that you said I can't imagine anything else, and I sometimes think to myself, we live in this bizarro upside down world. In any other country in the world, in any other planet in the universe, this wouldn't be a contest, right? There wouldn't be a 50-50 race between a vice president who is far from perfect, and I have my criticisms for her, and I'll talk about them later, but a former president who is a convicted criminal, found liable for rape, twice impeached, incited insurrection. I can be here all day listing what he's done. Do you think that's what's driving a lot of the anxiety, this idea that surely someone like him can't win, but then we look at the polls, we talk to Trump supporters, we say, wow, he could win?
I think so. I mean, I think for me personally, that's definitely what I can't wrap my head around. I have some family friends back in Illinois who are incredible. They lead lives of service. They're really decent, good people who shake their heads and tell me that I'm being brainwashed by progressive thought and by the woke agenda. And so that is what causes the anxiety, where I say, listen, Joe and Steve, I I think history will prove that you are actually, if anyone's being brainwashed, it's you. I don't understand how you can see past the rape adjudication, the 34 felonies, and yes, just the litany of immorality and criminality. I don't understand how the other side's messaging is working so successfully that decent Americans are like, no, that's our guy. We love that guy.
I mean, you mentioned Illinois. You grew up, I know, in the Midwest, and we talked about it last time. Is that where your politics come from where you grew up, from your family, from your parents?
I suppose. I mean, my parents are very moderate. They are the most exemplary citizens I've ever met. They just lead these quiet lives of service. You would never know that they're Catholics and that they're churchgoers, but from their actions, the way that they give generously of themselves to our family and their communities, they've set an example that me and my siblings aspire to, but will never live up to my mom and dad. And so that affects a lot of the decision making in my life, where I look at their lives of moderation, and it's weird. It's weird to take those values and then be a successful actor in Los Angeles. But it does really affect my decision making, where I say, okay, I could spend 6 months away from home doing a show in Australia, and it'll garner me a lot of wealth, but it will be unhealthy for my home and for my family. And so those values do come into play in my life's decisions.
But you mentioned a couple of your friends. I think you said Steve and Joe. I assume those are pseudonyms, and you're not actually throwing real friends of yours under the bus on a national podcast. But do you get into rows and arguments with old friends of yours who are Trump supporters?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you've touched on sort of the main thing I want to talk about with you, which is like I've done recently a couple of funny songs with a very talented partner named Mark Rivers. He's the musical genius, and I guess I'm the good-looking one, which is pretty sorry. But we've done a couple songs with a sense of humor. One is called "I'm a Kamala Man," and one is called "You Better Vote." And what I'm astonished by, whenever I sort of put out any messaging on social media or in other venues, and I say, hey, for whatever reason, I think we should vote for Harris and Walz. I'm a progressive. I believe in women's right to choose and all of these, all of these progressive liberal leanings. I'm a man of the theater. That's what we do in the theaters. We hold up a mirror to society and say, what needs medicine? What can we heal? And when I put this messaging out, if you disagree with me, if you say, no, respectfully, I've done the math and I'm going to vote for whoever else, any other option, that's perfectly fine. That's what's wonderful about our system and our country. But the amount of vitriolic hate and violent rhetoric, and specifically, crazily, homophobia, like half of the hate that I get is just straight up homophobic slurs and like questioning my manhood, which is just this baffling sort of sophomoric, childish playground idea that I just wonder why, the sort of right-wing mentality is so fear-based that I suggest an idea of change or an idea of empathy, and they say, why are you gay? Or why are you not a man? My favorite part of that, of course, is that the person they're supporting, they imagine him to be, I think Byron Donalds, the Florida congressman, said the other day, he's an alpha male. It's not toxic masculinity. He's an alpha male. And what's funny about that is all the memes you see of Trump, they're all kind of AI generated. They don't actually share pictures of the real alpha male Trump. Isn't that weird? Look, it's funny. I can't help what Mother Nature made me look like and sound like, but I often get cast as a person who, you send out to split firewood or to do the hunting and the gathering. And I've never claimed any sort of masculinity, and I don't need to. I live in modern America where we're no longer required to kill a saber-toothed tiger for our family to survive. And so nonetheless, I'm astonished that and I would never pass any judgment on a person of business. I will generously call Trump a person of business. All of his life choices are the softest, most beta, if that's the terminology they want to use. He's chosen to sit on his ass on a golden toilet and like have fine lotions rubbed into his.
Stop, Nick! You're giving me visual images. I need to have dinner after this. Please stop.
It would never occur to me to bring up. I mean, obviously, to bring up anybody's gender or their level of masculinity or femininity or anything. All I want to talk about when I'm voting for anybody is their character, and what they represent. I don't care if Kamala was an incredibly butch, lesbian or an incredibly feminine, like beauty queen. It doesn't matter as long as she's creating policies that I want to vote for.
Nick, you mentioned your songs. Let's play a clip from You Better Vote. I think we've got a clip to play. Let's have a listen.
You better vote. Don't let this moment pass. Or those future generations will someday kick your wrinkled ass. Box your ears and pull your hair. Set afire your rocking chair when they learn you didn't care enough to vote.
It's a fun song, but you know that a lot of conservatives have said you're a hypocrite. You're condemning political violence, but you put out a video in which an old man is being beaten to the ground by young children. Surely you must have seen that was going to be the response from kind of faux outraged Republicans.
I mean, I honestly, I have too much faith in my fellow men and women. I didn't expect that they would, with a straight face, be outraged that I'm suggesting we have our children beat up old people if they don't vote. It's obviously a very funny idea. And once again, if you're very conservative and you say I don't think that is that funny, that's fine. I've taken lots of criticism my whole life. And if you're not, I think Bertolt Brecht said, if a third of your audience isn't walking out, then it's not art. So I take it as a badge of honor.
Let me ask you this, though. What do you make of this classic Republican double standard, I think it's fair to say, when it comes to offense and humor, right? So on Sunday at the New York rally, the hate rally that was held by Trump, you had this comedian talk about Puerto Rico being a floating island of garbage, Jews being cheap, black people liking watermelons. You had other speakers saying outrageous things about pimp handlers around Harris and her being the Antichrist. And then when people got justifiably outraged and upset about it, J.D. Vance went out and said, why can't liberals get a sense of humor? Why are they always pretending to be outraged and offended? It's just a joke. And then the very next day, Joe Biden is quoted as saying Trump supporters are garbage, which Biden says he didn't mean to say. And Vance says, I'm outraged. Within 24 hours, they just turn on a dime.
Well, I mean, it's a great example. That guy is just a shame. I shake my head and, hope that he'll enjoy his time on the shelf with Sarah Palin in the annals of we forgot about them.
I was just on a show with Sarah Palin, so sadly she hasn't been totally forgotten, but yes.
Well, I mean, you're a better man than I, but I'm not surprised at that level of hypocrisy because that kind of performative outrage is all they have going. Like if they weren't griping about our sense of humor or anything else, they would have to detail what their progressive new policy ideas are. And since they don't seem to have any of those, all they can do is gripe about what's terrible about our candidates.
Yes, and clutch pearls and pretend to be outraged. We all know they're not outraged, but they pretend to be outraged. So, Nick, this is the third election in a row where Donald Trump is on the ballot, right? We just can't get rid of this guy, like a bad smell. I fear that he's going to be on the ballot for every election for the rest of my life. And yet people kind of become numb to him, right? I'm sure you've seen this. People are like, oh, well, we had him before. We survived him one time. Donald Trump. Let's not exaggerate how bad he is. I was talking to my friend Mark Lamont Hill the other day, the journalist who's also a Green Party supporter. And he said, look, isn't the problem that Democrats say every 4 years, this is the most important election of your lifetime? And that, by definition, devalues that line. Although I happen to believe this is the most important election of our lifetime. And I was just thinking about democracy and what's at stake and what America could look like. And I'm sitting on a plane and I'm looking for a movie to watch. And I watched Alex Garland's Civil War. which I hadn't got around to watching. And I texted you a picture of the president in that film. And spoiler alert, look away now if you haven't watched the movie. The president gets killed. He's an authoritarian, slightly fascistic president in the middle of an American Civil War. The president gets killed, and that president, Nick Offerman, is you.
That's right. I'm so grateful to work with Alex Garland. I think he's such a brilliant and humanistic thinker. He's a wonderful artist. And the thing that I love about that film is it is set slightly in the future, and it's in this sort of waning days of a civil war. It's about 4 journalists who take a road trip from New York City to D.C. to try and get a final interview with the hopefully deposed president. And the thing that is so, I think, revolutionary about the movie is Alex resisted any urge to let you know any coloration or politics of which side is which.
Yeah.
There's a thing called the Western Forces, which is California and Texas have banded together. Florida is seceding.
Yeah.
And then you're just driving through the aftermath of a civil war, but you don't know who's who or who, if there's red or blue, or all you know is it's gone down. And it's a cautionary tale saying it doesn't matter who you vote for. It doesn't matter if it was a Republican or president or Green Party or anybody else. It came to America. We let it come here. Alex's cautionary tale says, if we keep going down the partisan road we're on, we're going to end up shooting at each other, shooting at our neighbors, and that's terrifying indeed.
You were the president in that movie. When you were cast in that role and you saw the script, did you think, this is a fun dystopian fictional story, or did you think, I'm actually about to appear in a future documentary?
I mean, again, I'll remain nauseously optimistic, but I come from a family and a community of very good people who they're farmers and librarians and school teachers. I myself am an artist and a woodworker, and so the people in my sphere, we all produce things. We all try to help others, and we try to add to the world of civilization rather than destroy or cast hatred or be negative. We try to be on the side of positivity. And so when I read that Alex Garland script, I think this is terrifying because you're touching on human possibilities, but hopefully because of wonderful artworks and storytellers like Alex Garland, and Mike Schur and Craig Mazin and the other beautiful people I get to collaborate with. Hopefully we will continue to open people's eyes and hearts.
So I'm a lot more pessimistic than you are, Nick. I still have hope, but I don't think hope is the same thing as optimism. I hope for the best, but I look at this future and I think, I don't see anything but darkness coming our way, whether he wins or loses. I definitely think there's a potential for civil war. This country is a heavily armed, deeply divided country with a very angry minority of white folks who don't like the color the country is becoming, the browning of America, the majority-minority. And yeah, I do think it can happen here. I think there's this weird American exceptionalism that says, oh, well, we're immune to global or historical trends. But actually we're not. And in fact, we're more susceptible to it because of, as I say, our gun culture, history of violence, and we've had a civil war. What I think was interesting about the film is, as you pointed out, it shows the different areas of America and what they might be doing. But I actually don't even think a civil war needs to look like a kind of armies on the battlefield. A civil war can be low-level insurgency. It can be domestic terrorism. It could be political assassinations. We've seen that in modern American history. And I feel like a campaign like Trump's can put that on steroids. I mean, his supporters like to point out that he's been the victim of 2 assassination attempts, one of whom was from a registered Republican voter. But I do wonder if we are going to, God forbid, have a civil war in this country, how much of a role do you think Elon Musk and misinformation is going to play in all that?
A great big role, and I'm glad you said this because my favorite writer is a Kentucky agrarian named Wendell Berry, and one of the things that he talks about is not liking the idea of optimism because if you say you're optimistic, you're giving away your agency. You're saying, well, I think it's all going to turn out okay, and without giving yourself the need to be responsible for any action to help it turn out okay. And I agree with you that I'd like to change my answer from cautiously optimistic to hopeful, because people like yourself and all of the other thinkers that are interested in decency, that are interested in the actual equity to be found in the American experiment, we are not going away, and our voices are not silent. And so ultimately, you know, I think that it is terrifying that the richest man in the world and his ilk. I keep saying, I can't understand these billionaires are so ego driven. You know, Bezos doesn't endorse a candidate because ostensibly, from what I read, he wants to get favorable contracts for his rocket ship company.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's the allegation. Yeah.
If you have that kind of budget, it would be so easy to take a fraction of your fortune and be the coolest person on the planet. If you just call up Chef Jose Andres and say, "Hey, here's 20 billion, feed the world," you know, like, yep. I'm going to keep going with my satellite company, or
Nick, that would only leave him with 230 billion if he gave away 20 billion. Come on, you can't live on that.
I don't understand.
Nor do I.
I mean, you raise a good point, because of the thing that frustrates me is I don't understand the Elon Musk owns Twitter, the corporate interests that generally own the mainstream media, so that no matter what messaging you get, it's never the fully straight dope, which is what attracted me to you in the first place, is that you do your best to say, no, no matter how this looks, I'm going to do my best to get the truth out of this interview or out of this story. But I mean, it's like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. It's so sad that you should be anomalous. You know, that you can count the politicians in Congress who aren't taking corporate money on two fingers. Like, it's or maybe two hands. But the fact that we're so enmeshed in that sensibility of being fed the information through the corporate channels about what we don't need to worry about in what's going on with the planet is what I consider to be my life's fight. You know, to communicate to the audience, to think about who's using our natural resources and how. For me, a lot of it has to do with agriculture. I always encourage people to read the books of Wendell Berry and Michael Pollan, which will educate you about what is in the grocery store. There's a great book called Sacred Cow about healthy grass-fed beef versus industrial meat factories. And so these answers, these sort of holistic answers, are out there. They're all anti-corporate. They all are, against consumerism, and that is where our future lies. With independent journalism like yourself.
Thank you. I hope that is where future lies. But as I say, the pessimist in me looks at Trump, looks at Musk. One is a billionaire, one is a pretend billionaire, and they want to kind of, control our democracy, the messaging, propaganda. They're reactionary. I look at Trump and Musk, and I think to myself, I understand why people build personality cults, right? Throughout history, people have built personality cults. My question always is, but why these personalities? You couldn't come up with anyone better than Trump and Musk. What do you think the attraction is of these two very odd men to millions of Americans who worship them? I just don't get it, Nick.
I get the fraction of Trump's appeal, that he's this loudmouth, I don't give a shit character that says, we're going to bring down the status quo. Like, because, and this is how if I had a podcast like this, I would open every episode by saying, I'm Nick Offerman. I'm a human being, which means by definition, I'm flawed. I'll spend my life trying to improve myself and trying to be decent, but I'm also a human being of indulgences and desires, which means I will always be a sinner. And we're going to talk about the government. The government will always be flawed. We will never be done improving our system of governance. Whether you're governing 100 people or 100 million people, everybody is never going to be happy. And so that's why we are progressive thinkers. That's why we I want to conserve my money so that I can pay my mortgage and have health insurance, but I want to be liberal when engaging in change for public policy so that everyone can enjoy the same things that I've enjoyed my whole life. And so I would open that by saying, when I say please vote for Kamala and people say, oh, I guess you love genocide, I say, well, what a dumb thing to say. Of course I don't love genocide, and of course I have a problem with everything that's going on in that situation. It's incredibly sticky, and it's a conversation that requires a lot of nuance. But there's nobody on the ballot at the moment is a solution to that problem. And so you've got the rapist and you have the lifelong public servant. And so for this equation, I think the choice is clear. And
so, Nick, on that, let's talk about Kamala Harris a bit before we run out of time, because we talked about Trump. I half agree with what you say, right? I agree with you that no candidate on the ballot, and I include Jill Stein here because she can't win, even though her platform on Gaza is something I agree with. No candidate on the ballot is a solution to what's happening in Gaza, sadly. That is the tragedy of this choice. There is no one actually coming up with a plan to protect kids from being killed as we speak. I differ with you, and I don't think it's that nuanced or complicated. I think it's a matter of American bombs shouldn't go to a government that's using those bombs to drop them on children. And I think that, for me, is that's the one thing where Harris will not budge from Joe Biden. I assume, and I interviewed John Legend recently, who's another kind of high-profile celebrity supporter of the vice president, and he said the same thing. He's like, look, I wish, for electoral reasons in Michigan, I wish she'd do this, but also for political and moral reasons. We restrict military aid to horrible countries all the time. Why do we not restrict it to this horrible government in Israel? I would assume that's a position we can all agree on, separate to our politics, what we think about Israel-Palestine. It's just we shouldn't give weapons unconditionally to a government dropping them on kids.
I agree wholeheartedly, 100%, and that doesn't require nuance. It's the entire situation that, especially to speak about in a public forum, suddenly gets really sticky if you're expected to have a binary opinion, and I think it's more complicated than that. But as far as U.S. involvement, absolutely, I agree with you.
And on that, it's not just Gaza, and this is the problem. I was talking to Congressman Ro Khanna, progressive out of California, who was saying she needs to find 3 things. Now it's too late. We're days out from the election. But he was saying this a couple of weeks ago. He still believed that she needed to find 3 things where she could say, this is where I'm different to Joe Biden on 3 substantive issues. Whether we like it or not, and it's a topic for another conversation, Joe Biden is a super unpopular president. His record at home, his Gaza record, I'm very against. His domestic record has been pretty good. The economy is much stronger than people believe, but he doesn't get much credit for it. The point is he's unpopular, and she's yoked to this unpopular president, and she goes to interviews, and she's asked to differentiate herself from Joe Biden, and she says stuff like this. Let's play a clip from The View. I'm not sure if you saw it. Let's play this.
Well, if anything, would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
When I heard that, I wanted to shoot myself in the head. You can't be the change candidate running as the person instead of Biden and go, yeah, but I would have done everything the same as Joe Biden. That just makes no sense to me. I'm not a politician, but that makes no sense to me as a political strategy. What about you?
I would agree with that. I had not seen that clip, but that seems like a softball that you're set up to say, okay, great, thank you. Here are 3 things that I've thought about and prepared.
Yes.
With which I can move forward. 100%. It would not have been that hard to come up with.
What do you make of Tim Walz, who I was urging the Harris campaign to pick over Josh Shapiro, over Mark Kelly, over some of the other people they were considering? He was very dynamic in the summer. He joins the campaign. I feel like they pulled some of the life out of him. You know, this consultant class, the pollsters. I feel like they tried to borify him, and his whole appeal was quite outspoken. And I was delighted recently to see him slightly unleashed again on the campaign trail against Elon Musk, who I can't stand. Let's play a clip of Tim Walz.
But look, I'm not going to waste all the time I'm in. I'm going to talk about his running mate. His running mate, Elon Musk. Elon's on that stage, jumping around, skipping like a dipshit on these things.
You're a comedian, Nick. I mean, we need some humor. We need some snark. We need a bit of spicy language on the campaign trail, don't we? Not robots.
I couldn't agree more. I love that about Governor Tim, and he really is where I come from. He's very Midwestern,
yep.
And he's just a guy who can like change his own oil, and that says so much. I mean, because so much of our population has become this consumer class that thinks they have to have an app to have somebody come change a light bulb for them.
Oh crap! I feel seen.
Which, I mean, to each their own. We all have our skill set. But I love that, and I also would back up what he said. The fact that the richest guy in the world feels the need to like buy a social media platform to try it in the hopes that somehow people will think he's cool or funny, and then to go jumping around like a dipshit at a Trump rally is just unfathomable. I think it's really sad. It speaks to somebody who I think just needs a hug, somebody to say, "Hey, buddy, you did a good job."
Don't you? I mean, I'm not a psychoanalyst, but I do find it interesting when you say you need a hug, and you look at Donald Trump and Elon Musk, both of whom had major daddy issues, major issues with fathers who didn't seem to love them in the way they wanted to be loved. And I wonder whether the rest of the world is now being punished because they had shit parenting.
I think that's huge. I think that the party of family values is really missing a lot of familial practices like affection. I mean, I whenever I can, if I'm going to disagree with somebody, I go into a default mode of affection, because there's nobody, even the people I despise the most, if they came into my yard hungry, I'd say, all right, let's get you a sandwich. Now, what's your deal? Oh, wow, I really disagree with your deal, but how's your sandwich? Like, there's a base human empathy. There's a sense of dealing in affection versus dealing in hatred or dealing in fear. And those guys really seem to be dealing in insecurity. So their first response is, here's who we should hate. Here's who we should punish. And the Democrats are like, okay, how can we do our best to help everybody possible?
Some Democrats, not all Democrats, but yes, some Democrats, like the ones you mentioned earlier. Let me ask you this before we run out of time. Let me ask you this. On Tuesday night, are you going to be up all night watching the results? Are you going to be stressed? We're going to be doing live coverage. I'm going to be stressed during the live coverage. What's your plan? And what are you going to do if you see Donald Trump come on your screen and say, well, I'm declaring victory. I've won, like he did last time?
I mean, I think we have to expect some assholery or other from the orange one. But just like I've been doing ever since he came down that goddamn escalator, I'll be breathing deeply. I'll be, if I need to, I'll read a Mary Oliver poem or look at some Wendell Berry and say, okay, the assholes are a little louder or a little softer tonight. But I'll keep my head down and keep trying to do good work.
A good message, but I'm not going to end on that message. I'm going to end on a separate one. I'm going to ask you, Nick, as someone who was in one of the best TV shows about government that was ever made, the one and only Parks and Rec, what would your advice be if Kamala Harris wins the presidency, wins the Senate and the House? She's got this governing platform. What is your advice for her as a president? What should she be doing?
Well, I mean, I'm trying to think. I guess I would come down much more on the side of Leslie Knope than the side of Ron Swanson.
That's good to hear.
As always, I would say you've got the keys to the kingdom. You're in the driver's seat. Move us forward. Use your clout. Continue to chip away from corporate control over our government and pass legislation that is legitimately reforming for the people and not helping out Monsanto.
That is a good message to end on. Nick Offerman, thank you so much for taking time out to talk to us ahead of this, in this nauseously optimistic moment, as you put it earlier. I would urge all of our subscribers to check out Nick wherever you see him. Make sure you've liked and subscribed the We're Not Kidding podcast. Subscribe to Zeteo.com. Give us some support. Nick said it earlier. We need some independent, non-corporate media. Give Zeteo your support. Tune into We're Not Kidding every 2 weeks. I'm Mehdi Hasan.
I'm still Nick Offerman.
And We're Not Kidding. We're Not Kidding is a Zeteo production. I'm your host, Mehdi Hasan, and today's co-host was Nick Offerman. Our executive producer is Kieran Alvey. Our senior producer and editor is Frank Capello. Our music was composed by Andy Clausen. Our design is by Alicia Tatone. Our mix engineer is Valentino Rivera. And the title card animation is by Ehsan Mezghali.